Thank you so much for coming. My name is William Edelglass. I serve as Director of Studies here at the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies in Barry, Massachusetts. And I am so glad to be with you all, and especially with Willa and Martin. Before I introduce Willa and Martin, I want to say a few things about how this morning will unfold. And what we're going to do is start with a little bit of guided embodied meditation. We'll have a conversation with Willa and Martin, and I might ask a few questions. Then we'll have another guided meditation, and then we will open up a question and answer period. And at any time, at any point during the conversation, before the Q&A or during, you should feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom bar and pose a question there. Also, if you would prefer to have a live transcript of what is being said so you can read it, on the bottom right of the Zoom bar, it says CC, and there's a little button. And if at any point you have any questions about anything that's going on technical, not content, you should feel free to send an email to contact@buddhistinquiry.org. And thank you to Julia and Cassie and Sarah for addressing those issues. Okay, so I'd like to say a few words about Martin and Willa. When Martin was 19, at a very young age, he went to India and spent the next 5 years in retreat centers and ashrams and monasteries, mostly in India and Thailand, including 2 years with a teacher in a hermitage in the Himalayas, doing a variety of different practices, different lineages. And when he came back to Europe, ended up settling in France, where he has run a Dharma center with his wife and a friend in the Dordogne in Southwest France. And if you are looking for one of the most beautiful Dharma centers in the world, that would be a good place to go. It seems so lovely, with a river, gorgeous buildings and gardens. Willa Baker is the author of several books and the founder of the Natural Dharma Fellowship and Spiritual Guide there, and also of Wonderwell Mountain Refuge, another gorgeous, wonderful retreat center that looks up at these beautiful mountains of New Hampshire. She is the author and translator of several books, and I think spent about 12 years in monastic training, including doing 2 consecutive 3-year retreats. And from my own embodied and visceral experience, I know what a wise and insightful and wonderful teacher Willa is. So I'm so glad and grateful that the 2 of you are here to explore embodied awareness. And Willa, maybe you could begin by leading us in a meditation. Thank you.
Thank you, William, and so glad to be here with all of you and with Martin. Thank you. Yeah, so we thought we'd start with just some settling practice this morning before we get into conversation, to begin with grounding in the body. So I invite you at home to settle onto your seat for a few minutes of practice. And begin by dropping down from the thinking mind into the feeling body. And to help yourself with that dropping, you might think of your attention or this thing that we call mind as a handful of salt, and your body like a vase of warm water. And you release that handful of salt, your mind, into the vase of warm water, your body, and feel your mind dissolve all over the body. A diffuse all over body awareness. Feeling the heaviness, the weight of the body, its groundedness. The aliveness of your senses right here, right now.
So much, Willa. We invited Willa and Martin to have this conversation because they have both published really beautiful books, wonderful books on the role of the body, the role of the body in Buddhist practice, an awakened body, somatic mindfulness, And one of the characteristics of both of these books is that the authors have woven stories, especially stories of their own lives, into their explorations of the place of the body. And Martin, I wonder if we could start with you. If you would be willing to share a little bit about your own trajectory and some of the a story of how you came to the place where you recognize and explore the place of the body in practice.
Sure. So, hello everyone. Firstly, it's nice to be here. Very nice to just be led into our meeting by Willa's such kind of steady and embodying guidance. And then with your question, William, it reminds me really of the way in which when I started practicing and being in Asia in these various monastic settings or with my teacher in the mountains, you know, I didn't know what was going on with my teachers when they were meditating, right? Just sitting like this, no idea what's going on. But I could see more what was going on in the other moments. And one of the things that was very touching to me, and I think I probably described some aspect of this in my book, was the way, and I don't know why it's this particular image, but the way my teacher would take the jar off of the tea. Uh, take the lid off the tea jar. Or the way he would add a piece of wood to the fire. And there was something in a quality of care and attention, or caring attention, that made the most ordinary of moments or the most ordinary of activities feel sacred somehow. And it was very, very touching, very impactful for me. That sense of not just how to meditate, but the real sense of actually an invitation to learn how to live. And that was in kind of stark contrast to what I often noticed with my peers and other people I was hanging out with in these places and practicing together. And then it's like the bell rings, the meditation ends, and despite the encouragement to be mindful, it turns out go forth and be mindful isn't enough of an instruction. I mean, it's a good instruction, but it's not full enough for how to take body presence of meditation into these other moments. And so I found I wanted myself to be interested in how I, did my whatever my equivalent was of unscrewing the jar of tea. And this sentence of the Buddha's kept coming back to me. Right? The whole universe arises and passes right here in this body. And so the sense of just the wish to enter into experience rather than be mindful. I found that construction, right, to be mindful of experience, just didn't seem like a good fit for me. And so I want a language of entering into experience, being intimate with experience, sensing experience from the inside. That kind of language just felt a lot more alive and rich. And so that's where the interest to both to practice in that way and then to express teachings in a way that really centers this kind of embodied awareness, where that came from.
So just to, I feel this resonance with what you're saying, Martin, about how in my early days also there were teachers that I met who the teaching wasn't so much about what they said as it was about how their energy was expressing itself through their embodiment. And I think back then, I didn't have the language, in my 20s, early days, how to express what I was experiencing with those teachers. My language felt like it fell short. But now looking back, these teachers were teaching me through their bodies. It was like there's another language that was being spoken, so to speak, spoken, a non-conceptual language of embodiment. And that was so impactful and still continues to be impactful for me. I think what brought me to the body to eventually write this book was the realization at a certain point in my life, maybe after 15, 20 years of practicing pretty intensely, that in some ways my practice had become mentalized. And even though I had teachings and instructions on, for example, in retreat settings, how to do yoga as a liberating practice. So the Tibetan tradition has a yogic dimension to it where we actually learn all kinds of bodily routines. It was hatha yoga essentially, and that these hatha yoga exercises, you could become liberated doing any one of them. Even that notion was there in the tradition. Is so exciting for me at the time. But still, even with that, these words, like you were saying, mindfulness, attention, awareness, nature of mind, being a Westerner and being brought up with this notion that the mind somehow unconsciously, the mind is actually the brain, not really consciously thinking that, but that the mind somehow is from here up. And so hearing these words that are meditative words, mindfulness, nature of mind, still my grasping onto this notion of mind and subtly my practice kind of from here up, that actually what I'm realizing is either out there somewhere in space or in the stratosphere, or what we're trying to embody is somehow up here, and it has to do with our ideas about things. And actually what is being pointed to is this all over bodily experience. It so includes and is grounded in our senses and in the feeling body and in interoception. So what brought me to this book and in my whole practice, we did this loop kind of away from the body and then back home to the body. So very much grounded in personal experience, like with you too, Mart. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that image you used in the meditation of the handful of salt dissolving into the vase of bodily water. And likewise, when you were just describing there, it's like I have it's sort of like a memory headache of that way of practicing, right? When it's sort of all going on up here. And in my, sincerity of wanting to practice well and sincerely, it was like, I was meditating hard. I was meditating here. And whether the idea of trying to concentrate the mind, oh dear, no wonder that gave me a headache, because it's sort of like as if trying to squeeze out these other elements of experience. And it's not that that is so much there in the teachings I received. It's more, like you say, this equation. As soon as we say mind or even consciousness, right, we nevertheless, even though we know it's not true that our consciousness doesn't live in this little box here, the tendency to relate to it in that way is so strong, right? And therefore the tendency to have at least a subtle level of tension infusing one's practice, right? And conversely, increasingly, the quality of relaxation. Like for me, relaxation is like the most exquisite, sublime, profound quality. And I often hear meditation teachers somewhat indignantly saying, well, meditation's about a lot more than just relaxation. And I think, well, really? Because actually, just that sense of actually the softening. Relaxation is profound. Relaxation is infinite, in my experience. And it's not just, of course, a muscular relaxation. There's all kinds of subtleties of relaxation that come online. And yet we have the associations. And for anybody listening, you might just think the usual ways we know to relax involve some kind of going unconscious, right? We relax, by watching TV. We relax by having a few drinks. We relax by taking a nap. And so relaxation sometimes doesn't seem like a good fit for people in meditation, because the idea is, if I relax, I space out. And conversely, we have associations with focus of being, tense in some way. Like I was saying, trying to meditate. And yet, what we both in our different ways, and we were saying earlier how much we both appreciate the parallels of the way we've approached this in the book, finding a way actually relaxation supports, like you rest into the fact that you're here. You're already aware, you're already awake. You don't need to do something to be awake. Awareness, so that relaxation actually supports a natural clarity. And then the natural clarity allows you to recognize whatever tensions may still be there and relax. And so that there's this kind of co-support of clarity and relaxation, clarity, relaxation.
So I was so excited when, I'm just going to show the people that are here your book for a second. So your book arrived from France. It's so exotic to my little mailbox in New Hampshire, and to see how soon in the book you got to relaxation. And I also have felt that is a key element, that actually we're all trying too hard on the cushion. If we're trying at all, we're trying too hard. And so one thing that really struck me was how you went right to relaxation. And it reminded me of this moment in my life, maybe about 7 years ago, when I was invited to a Zen center in Boston, and I went to teach just one time. And essentially the whole meditation practice was about deep relaxation. And then later I gave a little talk, and the main thing I was talking about is that if you relax, everything you need will be there. You don't have to try at all. And one of the people at the end of the Q&A raised their hand and they said, I've been here for 10 years at this Sendo, and I've never heard that word in this room. And I was like, what? So, I think we don't always know that that we don't always feel like we have permission. That we do. We have permission to relax, and there's this kind of unwinding, this natural unwinding that happens in the body. And somehow the body already knows. The body already knows how to be awake and how to be aware. All the things that we think of as enlightenment, the body is already expressing. And you use this word early on in your book here, embodied presence. And so our body already has embodied presence. Or in my book, I used a similar kind of phrase. I found a similar phrase to replace mindfulness. But what I chose was somatic mindfulness. And I struggled with that as the word. You used embodied presence. I struggled with it because it still has the word mindfulness in it. But I wanted to put it there because I didn't want people who were mindfulness practitioners to dismiss that your mindfulness is this thing that we so want. Mindfulness is already happening. It's already present in your body. You just need to pay attention or to listen. I loved the term embodied presence in your book, and I felt like that really captured very well this notion that the body is already, like you were just saying, we don't need to try. The body's already expressing what it is that we're searching for. It's happening now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because let's face it, the horse has bolted, or whatever the expression is. It's too late now to try and contain the word mindfulness, right? It's out there in the culture. But it is a little unfortunate in some way, because it supports what is already our tendency, right, to be disembodied in some way. And then, and again, people listening to this might ask themselves, what's your basic assumption that you have about being mindful. And it might be, for example, the assumption that one's mind is here and doesn't move. But that's a hopeless task. The nature of mind is to move. Your mind will be moving much of the time. So how about relaxing about what your mind's doing, relaxing into the fact that you're already here, and tasting that quality of presence, sati, usual translation mindfulness, tasting that quality of presence by virtue of just the way you're feeling your arms and your legs. And hey, let's include just right now, while we're speaking and while you're listening, right? So that rather than just listening, mentally and trying to understand, to listen from a place where you just relax into being here. And you give ourselves, okay, we might firstly notice layers of tensions, right? And if you're standing or sitting or walking, you need some tension to do a bit of that. But a lot of the time, as you come inside, you will notice some tensions that are unnecessary and unhelpful, right? Maybe around here or in your jaw or your shoulders. And just softening a little the unnecessary and unhelpful tensions that we find. And there, like you say, Willa, in terms of the body already knows, we get a visceral taste of something that's liberating. You don't have to put a capital L on that liberation, right? But just the actual freeing in the moment, in a simple but tangible way of just being here a little more fully, a little more fluidly, a little free, and to somehow keep faith with that, just keep coming to and coming in, and just keep sensing and softening, sensing and softening. And it seems to me that's potent and has much more to do with what's called mindfulness than the forcing our mind to be in some kind of present moment, which often has an attempt to contain or control, to hold the mind in a way. And your mind is or at least I'll speak for myself, my mind is uncontainable.
I love that.
So I have a question for you.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm interested. When you said, we both were saying how we felt our teachers were, beyond the helpful instruction and guidance we may have received, that sense of your teachers teaching through their own embodied presence, that relaxed presence. It was very, very potent for me, being around people who I could see and feel they were kind of loose in themselves. And so that association of freeness as belonging to a kind of ease. And they may have been actually, in quite a lot of discomfort in various ways. But nevertheless, the bodily sense of ease pervading that, whatever the discomfort or illness, etc., that may have been there. And so I'm wondering, in your role as teacher, because we're in the same situation, right? In some ways, we're giving people practices and teachings to do, but there's also there's something else that's going on in the teaching. And I don't know how much you can articulate that, but I'm curious how you bring that non-verbal sense of communicating embodied presence in the way you are with students.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think for myself, I need to be in my own practice to be a good teacher. So, I mean, that's a broader principle. So, before I teach, just doing what I just did with all of you, coming down from whatever ideas I have about what I'm going to say. As a teacher, we want to plan. We want to have a teaching plan, and I'm going to cover this point and this point and this point. And I actually like having those plans sometimes because it gives me a scaffolding in which to relax. But ultimately, when I teach the Dharma, I start with practicing myself, whether or not I'm doing that sitting before I go into the meditation hall, or being on the seat and coming down from the thinking mind into the feeling body, and getting into that same place of embodied presence, to use your word, or maybe a place of deep trust and surrender. You know, you were talking about, as a teacher, we often want to control what's going to happen. You know, we want to control the situation. As a teacher, as a human being, forget being a teacher, right? As a human being, we often are drawn to the idea that we want and can control what's going to happen, or we feel responsible to control it. But actually, there's another model which you have definitely described here, and I have tried to describe here, and that model is a model of surrender, a model of deep trust in the power of embodied presence to do the liberating for me, or to do the teaching for me, that I can ask the embodied presence to teach. Sometimes in our practice, and you're sure in yours as well, that takes the form of trusting lineage. Like, I trust the lineage to express itself through my embodied presence, and that takes the self out, like, or at least conceptually allows myself to step aside and to not feel like it has to take control of the situation, and just to see what happens when I ask myself this thing to be a transparent channel for what's going to come through embodied presence. How about you? How do you take this, Martin, from your practice into teaching? What do you do as your technique?
I wouldn't really describe it. I don't have a technique really for that, but I guess the process of it is just hanging out. I mean, my own practice with that is to hang out in, or hang out as, embodied presence, you know, in a way that just runs through everything, or at least wants to run through everything. And you know, I'm reminded of some old Zen story, I think, where somebody has some great enlightening experience and then goes to see the teacher to tell them about it. And when they get there to tell their teacher about their great experience, the teacher says, "Oh, when you came in to see me, which side of the door did you leave your shoes, left or the right?" And the person doesn't know. I can't remember. They were so full of their liberating experience. So the teacher just sends them, well, I don't want to hear about your liberating experience, you know, until you know where you're leaving your shoes. And I loved that story. And I check, you know, myself sometimes when I'm at home. How exactly, not just, oh, by the front door, but exactly where and how did I leave my shoes when I came indoors? Just to check. Because if I don't know, where the hell was I? What was I doing when I came in the door? You know? And so that sense, not just in teaching, but in anything and everything, of the willingness. And of course, one gets then caught up in some thought stream, and sometimes it's appropriate, right? It's like sometimes where my shoes are is not the most important thing. Often the sense of just how one's moving through the day and what's going on in a very simple way, it is really deserving of a care and an attention and a salt melting, like you were describing, that we don't give it enough. And so I'm often sort of extra aware of that if I'm walking to the Dharma hall to teach, and just listening to the sound of feet on gravel, and then taking off the shoes, and the feel of the door handle, and going in, and then the bowing to the shrine. And it's like, oh, just coming into the naturalness of things. And when you spoke about trusting embodied presence to do the teaching, you know, that sense to come into there's a sort of happening by itself, just the autonomic nature of breathing and heart beating, and the way that, look, hands move. I mean, the fact that all this is happening without any need for me to get involved with managing or organizing it. And in fact, the more I try to manage and organize it, the more a mess I make of it. And so, that happening by itself. And we get a chance to taste that with breath in meditation, for example. But when you can extend that, right? When you're walking, oh, walking happens by itself. And then even in speaking, so the more we add layers of complexity, the more we get convinced that I'm the one doing it. Like I've got to think of something to say. But actually, like right now, I don't know what's coming out next, right? So you stay and you settle and you sense and you trust in the sort of this autonomic nature until we start to taste a way in which everything can happen by itself. I can get less and less and less involved and give up on my own foolhardy attempts to manage things, and rather, like trust in the sort of the intelligence of the Dharma, we could say, or the intelligence of life, like the fact that we don't need to get it anywhere near as involved as we think we do. And of course, in the privilege of the teaching seat, that can become very, very apparent. So, yeah.
I was just listening to you talk, also being reminded of what a challenge in the very beginning of the pandemic, even pre-pandemic, with this emergence of technologies, Dharma and technology coming together. I was so challenged at first by speaking Dharma in this disembodied way through, it felt, at first, speaking into a lens or speaking into a screen. And oh my goodness, I froze. I don't know how it was for you, but that sense of embodied presence without the bodies of others in the room. At first, my body and it took me, I think, years to get over my self-consciousness with relating to technology. So not like it isn't challenging to actually access embodied presence in some contexts. For some of us, it's really challenging. And so that's been such a learning curve. But now, right, I feel your embodied presence. You're in France and I'm in New Hampshire. And everyone else here on the screen is from all over the world. And yet somehow we've managed, or I've managed to trust. I think it's the trust, right? Surrendering to the fact that all of these, our embodied presences are together beyond time and space. Somehow we have come together, and I can trust in that. And that allows me to contact this sense of this embodied presence again. And I wanted to ask you a question too, Martin. One of the things that really intrigued me about your book, and that was very different and yet the same between our two books, is, as soon as you come down into the body, as you encounter the entire mess and chaos of your life. So it's not like just coming down into the body, oh, now I can be awakened. I've got embodied presence. Now everything is good. More like you encounter the full mess when you come down into the body, the full entanglement of our humanness, including all of our emotions and our drives and our needs and our fears. It's all right here, right now. And one of the ways you expressed that in the book was through this, or one of the ways your doorway in was by talking about the drives, the instinctual drives, the drive to survive, the instinct to survive. You talked about three, the instinct to survive, the instinct to procreate, or the sex drive, and then the instinct to succeed, or to have power, maybe, or social instinct. Yeah. You talked about it as maybe the social instinct, and sort of its darker side as the need to have power, control. And I found that totally fascinating. And I wondered what drew you into that space of looking at the drives, and how have you worked with them? In my own case, it's been more around the energy of emotion. And that's how I approached it in my book. Go ahead, you start.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find those drives really interesting because they're just so hardwired, right? And they're really primary. Like we just have a survival drive and a sex drive and a social drive. We just do, right? So underneath, and those things are a little bit underserved often in Buddhist teachings. You know, I came from this Theravadan background. Sex is really underserved in Theravadan teachings. And actually, in most spiritual or religious teachings, there's some idea that there's a renunciate ideal. So, ideally, let's just avoid it altogether. And if you're not going to avoid it, we'll just align with the general, okay, we'll have some sort of lifelong monogamous relationship and don't talk about it too much, and that'll be the second best ideal. And that's it's just not good enough for what a potent force it is. So actually explore them in the book from different angles, but if I want to say a little bit, I think because even though we've all got all these drives and we can all recognize them, we can also find the primary one that animates us. And it especially comes out actually when those things aren't a biological imperative. Like I would imagine that most people listening to this, the biological imperative to survive, hasn't kicked up today, right, or yesterday even. That you haven't been so hungry and not had anything to eat, or so cold and not been able to clothe yourself, etc. Of course, there are a lot of people for whom those are daily realities. And that's why we need those drives, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't have made it as a species without them. But when the basic necessities are met, that's when it becomes really beholden to us to explore how the drives still act out. So the survival drive tends to act out in a kind of inner loop of self-concern. What do I need, right, to be comfortable, to be okay? The kind of the concern for comfort and security. What do I need? What do I need? So it's me trying to get what I need for me to feel okay. It's like a loop of self trying to reassure or self trying to make self feel better. The sexual drive is more self and another. Will you do it for me? Can you make me okay? And so that may be or may not be connected to sex itself, but it's more the fixation on a significant other that I need you to give me what I need. And so distinct from the survival drive where I'm trying to make myself feel okay, the sexual drive, I'm trying to get you to make me feel okay. And then the social drive is more just like the relationship to the world. Am I seeing others? Do I have their approval? Do I have their attention? Are they kind of going to feed me with enough sense of attention and approval mostly to give me the sense that I'm okay? And there's lots of different ways to explore each of those, but I think it's helpful. It was certainly helpful for me to just to work out my primary driver, which for me is the social drive, right? And then my partner, the survival drive is primary for her. And then when we look back in our own histories growing up, it's like, it makes sense why those became our distinct drivers. And so there's a lot of ways of working with that, not so much just in thinking about the patterns, but in this embodied sense, just seeing where do I go when I start to feel deficient in some way, where do I go to try to reassure myself or to get some kind of, to regulate. Right? So the survival type is more likely to withdraw, to regulate. The social type is more likely to go out, to regulate. The sexual type is more likely to kind of, to fixate on what the other's thinking of me or what I need from the other to regulate. So I just found there's a lot of ways of understanding and managing our own, particularly the deficient states that arise through that model of looking at the different drives. And maybe conversely then, Willa, you could say something about the emotional life and how you've been exploring that in terms of just an embodied exploration.
Well, what I so appreciated about your bringing the drives into your book was how you normalized the drives as a part of being human, as opposed to, oh, this is the, in Buddhism, we can really get into this idea that the needs and desires and fears and the absolute, this animal instinct to connect, that somehow those are weaknesses or foibles, because the Buddha taught, and this is such a simplification, I think now is a complete oversimplification of what the Buddha meant, that at the basis of our suffering is Trishna, right? This thirst to become, and that has to be somehow uprooted. Now, I suspect now myself I don't know. I mean, who am I to say? I've been practicing a long time, but where that has brought me back to, and also in connection to my trust and surrender to the body, is that our task in the Dharma is not to sort of refine or to somehow make ourselves into better humans, or into not to transcend. Our task is not to transcend. Our task is to accept the fullness of our humanness, and to skillfully channel our very natural animal selves into, channel the energies of that natural animal self into the best possible outcomes for ourselves and others. And it's not about rejecting those drives. So I really enjoyed that part of your book and how you just brought that in. In my own case, I spent many years thinking, or rather puzzling over, how some dimensions of the Buddhist tradition seem to be talking about uprooting the kleshas, these five poisons of desire and aversion and ignorance and envy and depending on which classification you're looking at, greed, or whatever else the fifth one might be. But wanting to, the tradition seeming to talk about uprooting, this word uprooting these kleshas in order to experience the bliss and the peace of nirvana. But actually other parts of the tradition talking about that's exactly the wrong approach, that all of these five kleshas are actually secretly five wisdoms. And that the only doorway that you can really walk through is the doorway of beginning to see their other side of these kleshas as being naturally wakeful, that they are naturally wakeful, and that our problem with the kleshas is just involvement of the ego and othering, and is largely the conceptual side of the emotion, not the emotion itself. And so for myself, my path has been about learning to love all of those emotions, and because they're lodged in the body. We live in an animal body, those emotions are going to happen. So I have been working myself over time to accept that that's a part of my being human. And now that that's a part of my being human, now how can I encounter these in a way that is more compassionate and curious, rather than demonizing and suppressing?
Yeah, much more relaxing, much more, just relieving to feel like I can inhabit my humanness rather than trying to put it away in some way. And it does seem to me sometimes that those are two kind of irreconcilable visions somehow. This sort of transcendent vision where all that goes away, which is attractive in some way because it can feel very messy, being caught up in my emotional life and caught up in sexual desire and caught up in all this. And this vision that I could leave all that behind is very compelling. But I was never any good at that, at least, So I don't want to be dismissive of that vision, but the other version of that, which is more imminent, that encouragement to enter into what's happening, to explore what's happening, to study what's happening, to befriend what's happening, that just seemed way more possible. And also the liberating invitation of that is right here in the inhabiting of it, rather than over there once I've managed to transcend it, which seems to me like the kind of the carrot and the donkey, You know, where transcendence remains sort of remote because it's always, oh, I've got all my habits and delusions seem to be in the way. And then it's hard work trying to get rid of habits and delusions. It's much more, to actually care for one's habits and delusions. There's what's that lovely phrase? Is it Dogen? Something about oh, I've completely. I'll mangle it now. Maybe I'll remember it a little later. I noticed that William's come in to keep us on track, so I'll leave it there for now.
Study the self to forget the self.
It wasn't that one. It's one. It's about delusion, being deluded about enlightenment, and being enlightened about delusion. Concern with enlightenment is delusion. Concern with delusion is enlightenment. It's something like that. So it's the encouragement. Don't worry about trying to get enlightened. Be interested in your delusions. Come close to your delusions, because awakening is right there. You can be awake about your delusion, but you can also be very deluded about awakening. So give up being concerned with the awakening. Be concerned with your delusions, and awakening will flower in the midst of them. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martin and Willa. That conversation was such a lovely invitation to thinking about what it might be to be on the path in an imminent, embodied way that doesn't turn away from the messiness and the richness of our animal selves, our animal bodies. And Martin, maybe you could lead us in a short meditation as a next phase of this event before we open up for the questions and responses.
Sure. So let's, there's this lovely phrase. It usually translates as embodied attention. It comes from the Pali, yoni so manasikara. And literally, yoni, it's a little non-specific in Sanskrit or Pali, but it can be used to refer to any part or the whole of the female reproductive area. So in yoga, yoni is often translated as vagina. But here it more means womb. So yoni so manasikara literally means womby attention. Right? Which I found a very, very evocative, beautiful kind of phrase when I heard it. And it's interesting to me that, for the men here, you might be feeling a bit bereft of having a womb, but we have no difficulty recognizing the difference between the heart, for example, as a physical organ, blood pump, and the heart as an energetic center, right, where emotional life happens. It's not that all emotion happens here, but we recognize that when we say the heart, it's like you come into the heart to meet. It's sort of like the energetic center of emotional life. And so this phrase of womby attention is pointing to the fact that your belly, your lower belly, right, is the womb as an organ. And it's interesting that it's also that the womb is the origin of life. The womb is that which kind of, expands. And the feeling of embodied presence often has that sense of a full-bellied feel to it. So we'll just sit for a few minutes and we'll give some attention to breath in a way that's emphasizing naturalness, relaxation, but with this attention, focus on a womby attention, letting your attention kind of rest down into your lower belly. So I'm just sitting in a way that expresses a certain dignity, noticing that you're already here, already awake. That bodily experience is very naturally available. And letting your attention be down in your belly. Down below your navel. And see if you can just feel the natural swell that happens on the in-breath down here. And the natural softening that happens with the out-breath. And you're letting your attention settle down in your belly, not as an act of will, but more as an act of resting, relaxing. Relaxing into the expansiveness of the in-breath. Into the natural softening of the out-breath. Into the momentary still point between breaths. Settling into your belly, again and again if necessary. Sensing into the natural feel, the rhythm, the movement of breath. Using the natural expansiveness of the in-breath to a little more fully inhabit the feel of being here. Using the natural relaxation of the out-breath as a way to rest a little more fully into being here. Resting into presence, just like this. Okay.
Thank you so much, Martin. There are already some really wonderful questions that are focused on practice. And I was thinking maybe we could start there. And maybe we'll start with this one. The question of, from someone who really deeply resonates with the idea that relaxation, letting go, um, is a wonderful way to get into a deeper meditative state. Um, but is raising the question of when that happens for this person, it sometimes leads to a kind of disembodiment. So there can be a wonderful warmth and energy in and around one's being or heart presence, but it feels like the body is actually no longer present. And this person says, doing a kind of a body scan, which in the insight world people may be more familiar with, that's how this person can get into the body during a sitting. And was requesting maybe either of you to address this. Is there something else other than the body scan that really allows one to enter into a bodily awareness?
Do you want to go, Miller?
Yes, there are so many doorways into embodied presence other than the body scan. The body scan is a very powerful practice, and that practice of course involves going from place to place in the body and paying attention to here and then here, throughout the body. It is a focused attention that's moving around the body that can result in an experience of body mind unity, could be result in an experience of this deep relaxation that we've been talking about. um, but there are many doorways into experiencing um, embodied presence. I'm using Martin's somatic mindfulness in my own case, but I like embodied presence, and just for fun I'm changing it up. But yeah, I think there's many doorways into that. And um, some of them involve a more focused attention, and some of them involve more like a diffuse attention, like your mind or your attention being the handful of salt dissolving all over the body, is an example of experiencing diffuse but focused attention. Diffuse attention that is relaxed and focused has this balance of relaxation and focus. So, first of all, yes, there are many doorways. Secondly, about the relaxation part, and then I'll turn over to Martin to reflect on this, the relaxation part of your question. Recently, I tried a float tank, which is an isolation tank where you float on saline and you can this deep relaxation, embodied relaxation. But then at a certain point, because there's sensory deprivation and it's dark, and your eyes are, everything is dark. There's a point where there's a kind of a pivot, and you feel as if you are pure consciousness, and there is no body because there's no stimulation happening. So there's this moment where it kind of pivots, and you feel this sense of pure consciousness. And I imagine that some one way to frame that is that, oh, I'm no longer in my body. But the way that I would frame it is actually consciousness is naturally embodied, in the sense that consciousness is a kind of body. Let me put it that way. We think of consciousness as being somehow totally separate from the body, but actually, mind and body have never, ever, while we've been alive, been separate. So, um, there's a kind of an infinite consciousness that is body. The consciousness of the body of infinite sky is the way that I think of that. So I think it might be exploring what happens when you relax. Are you really losing touch with body? Or are you experiencing a different dimension of body that is pure, infinite consciousness? I just put that out as a question. And I wonder, Martin, what your thought of that is, especially because both of us in both of our books go from the earth body to infinity. we both do the same trajectory. And I found that also extraordinary, that we sort of end up in the same place at the end of our books.
Yeah,
What do you think
yeah.
of that?
So I had a similar thought. Just like the limitation with the word mindfulness is that it's a bit mental. The limitation with talking about embodied awareness is that we might think that we mean this by this shaped thing by body, but that's only the very first sense, right? Actually, the experiential, and again, this is a term we both use independently. We talk about the difference between the conceptual body and the experiential body, and the more one comes inside the felt sense of embodied life, the less it feels this shaped, right? It starts to, rather than being a thing, body starts to feel like just the fluid medium of experience or the theatre of experience. It might feel spherical. It might feel diffuse. It might feel formless. It might feel there's no edge to it. There's no center to it. And so I'm wondering, what's the name of the person with the question? Oh, anonymous attendee. So that doesn't help. But um, that sense of the warmth in your heart, not to take that as evidence of being disembodied because you can't feel sort of like feet and hands and that more concrete sense, but just to really enter into presence in that warmth of heart. Presence in that warmth of heart, and see where that takes you. That doesn't sound disembodied to me, right? It's a relationship to the aliveness of body and the emotional life in that moment that feels very connected. If you can feel what's happening, that's suggestive of embodiment to me. And so I wouldn't be in too much of a hurry to go back to the body scan, which, like Willa says, can be really helpful for waking up areas of embodied experience where we habitually are a little numbed out or. But again, body scan can be done in a very mechanical fingers, hands, wrist, elbow way, or it can be just the sense of entering into the fizzing, the aliveness of bodily life. So when you're that sense of relaxing and warm-hearted, you don't need to go to a more mechanical or familiar sense of body. If you feel too spaced out or you get frightened, then by all means go back to a more conventional sense. But if that warmth of heart, which sounds like it is basically, sounds beautiful, warm-hearted and present, stay and explore. Stay and explore. Maybe warm-hearted and present is plenty good.
Thank you, Brian, for that question. So there are a few questions that bring up challenges that we have with our bodies. I think most of us at times feel embarrassed about our bodies and our body images, and recognize ways in which we fall short of ideas we should have about our bodies. So that is one kind of question. Like, how do we relate? Is there anything helpful to say about ways we can relate to a body that we don't feel as great about as we might want to? And then part of that feeling is also pain, chronic pain, that dwelling in the body, focusing on the body, can make the pain that arises in the body more present to us. And the third kind of area that some of the questions are addressing, and because our time is limited, I'll add this to the question, and that is the way in which the body holds trauma, and that really dwelling into the body when there's either body image or pain or the body holding the trauma, that can be really hard. And is there anything to say to address that?
Well, yes, I think that as soon as you begin to become intimate with your bodily experience, you will encounter all of your karma. You will encounter everything that's happened to you, and you will encounter the anxieties and traumas and parts of the self that are wounded, all of that is going to be encountered. You can't escape it if you become intimate with your bodily expression, this thing, this whole thing, the whole thing, because those patterns live in the body, and or in the language of yogic Buddhism, they live in the subtle body, which is this layer of embodiment that is energetic, or we might say in the more scientific language that our traumas live in the nervous system, and they are below the layer of the thinking mind. And so when we come down and start paying attention to what's happening in our nervous system, we begin to notice how we're interacting with the world, what triggers are happening, that what triggers are coming into our field of experience that activate the subtle body, and those patterns that rise up, and again they're very present for us, very alive for us. Now what's wonderful about intimacy with the body is, even though it turns our attention more towards those traumas, it also gives us a way to meet those traumas, or patterns, maybe I should say patterns, a way to meet those patterns other than in the thinking mind. Because in our culture especially, we focus on the thinking mind is going to solve all of our problems. So for example, cognitive behavioral therapy, which of course includes behavior, so includes the body, but it's possible that we can just meet those traumas, those patterns, right as they're arising in the subtle body, in the present moment. We can come alongside them, which is a different way of addressing them than asking this, okay, what is the history of this pattern? Why do I feel this way? What was it that my mother did to me that made me? So not taking all of that out, or that could be very useful, but just for a moment, not doing that, and instead just meeting the trauma, meeting the pattern in the body, and giving it some love, surrounding it with care and that relaxation that we've been talking about here. Learning to relax our resistance to what's present can be a profound healing for that pattern, and allow that to self-liberate in the present moment. So there are ways of addressing that somatic practice, body-centered meditation practice can help us with. It's not only about experiencing ease, it's also about experiencing the patterns in the present moment, and inviting them into a place of ease. Being loving towards those patterns is also a part of this kind of somatic direction, that you can encounter those things. So yes, all that shit that you're just all that stuff you're describing, that just now, the reason for those things, those are a part of our practice, not something that's taking us away from our practice. All of those feelings that we have about the body, all of the stories that we have about our body, all of that is also fodder for good practice. And Martin in his book, and me and my book both, we talk about body image as one of those we could say stones that we wear around our neck, our beliefs about the body, and those need to be worked through in order to really encounter the body in the body, which is this more experiential layer of embodiment. Martin, what do you have to add there?
Yeah, that the quality that you're highlighting, Willa, about just being gentle with tending to the discomfort. Well, it's inevitably uncomfortable, and there's this sort of paradox where, on the one hand, to enter into bodily experience is to encounter all the tensions, the reluctances, the bits we don't want to feel, etc. And yet, it's also the discovery inherently good. It's inherently pleasant, actually. It's like body is happy to be alive. A body wants to be alive. And the basic feel of being alive is nourishing. It's good. It's relieving. It's happy. Right? But the layer we taste initially may not be, probably isn't that nourishing, happy pleasantness. It's all the layers of disconnect and fear and resistance that we've built up over time. And so you need to, you need to tend to that. And I love that word, to tend, because it's the root is in attention, right? But it's also in tender, right? Kind of being tender with, patient with, forgiving of all that stuff you've built up. Of course you have. Human conditioning, right? You've learned to be resistant and distracted and defended. So, to give oneself some tender, patient attention to the going through of those layers. And then one starts to taste that it's fundamentally good and pleasant to be here. And I got COVID right at the beginning, about a year and a half or more ago now, and I've had quite a lot of effects of long COVID since then. So for most of the last year and a half, my bodily experience is quite unpleasant. I've got a lot of fatigue, a lot of weird stuff that happens continually in my lungs and chest. My heart rate goes all over the place, and all these other things. And it's been really interesting to just oh yeah, it's like this is a kind of at least semi-chronic condition that's been going on for a long time now. And to be able to tend to that which is unpleasant, and still to be able to taste beneath that the fundamental goodness and gladness about life here at all, and that this works at all, even though some bits of it seem quite dysfunctional, right? The very fact that we're here, we start to increasingly recognize as a source of goodness and gladness. So I think that bit is really, really important, to tend to that which arises along the way. And if what arises along the way is too much, the person used the language of trauma, if we encounter things that are too much, you cannot meet and you cannot tend to that which is too much. That's what too much means. It's too much, right? So that which is overwhelming, or that one can feel is going towards overwhelming, don't try to tend to that. You can come back to that later when it's not overwhelming. Go to something you can tend to. So if the sense of, oh, this is too much for me, okay, be respectful, it's too much. Come away and tend to the feel of like your feet, or just the touch of your hands on your knees when you're sitting. Right? Come to something which is not too much and tend to that. And that's a really helpful way of kind of regulating and of not trying to sort of bust through all this stuff I've got. No, you be gentle, be respectful, be kind in the way that you meet what you have to practice with.
Thank you, Martin. Our time is coming to an end. Willa, did you want to say something also about what, in response to some of the questions about if it is too much to really focus on the body in the way that they are thinking maybe one ought to or could, or that the invitation was? One question brought up, well, is there a way of extending metta to my own body? Or are there some initial suggestions or guidance, other than reading both of your books, for that initial stage before dwelling with the body does become pleasant, to help one get there?
I think Martin said it well with just knowing when it's too much, feeling when it's too much. And I certainly empathize with that feeling, or I'm just in the last 2 years, there have been points um, for me personally when things have felt like too much during the pandemic. And I think at those times, or when our perhaps our early his trauma history is triggered, is caring, taking care of the self care, which we may not think of as a Dharma practice, but it really is. It's a fundamental Dharma practice. And so think, instead of, oh, I need to work with this, or I have to work through my uh, my my difficult emotions, and I have to figure out what's at the base, and I need to fix myself. Instead of I need to fix myself, I need to care for myself. And what will that look like? And I think self-care is a profound Dharma practice, actually. Even the small things that we do to soothe the self, and take a hot bath, or um, call a friend, seek support. Seeking support is a profound Dharma practice that we're not all that good at, I think, sometimes. Or we might think that by that self-care is selfish, but actually self-care is altruistic, because if we don't care for this organism and all of its psychology, someone else is going to have to take care of it for us. So if we're taking care of that, we have freed up the others around us to be in a healthy relationship with us, to do what they need to do to contribute to the world. We have not become a burden, and sometimes that kind of self care takes the takes the form of leaning on others in a way that is vulnerable and open. So I just, maybe that's my response to that. Um,
Thank you so much, Willa. There are a number of really great questions, and I'm sorry we don't have the time. If you are interested, though, many of those questions are explored in Willa and Martin's books. I just put in the chat the links to Martin's book published by Wisdom and Willa's book published by Shambhala. There's also a question about whether or not Martin and Willa will be teaching any courses on their books. And Willa is going to be teaching a 6-month course with Wonderwell, who is the co-sponsor of this event, and also will be teaching at BCBS in 2023 on this theme. And Martin, this is as good a time as any to invite you to teach an online course for BCBS if you are interested in exploring this theme. And before we end, I just want to say, Martin's going to conclude with a few words, and then Willa will guide us in a meditation. Before that, though, just want to say that the needs of the body include food and housing and clothing, and our teachers at BCBS are not contracted. And what supports them in their lives, in meeting their needs for survival, is the practice of generosity, the practice of dana, which is the first virtue on the bodhisattva path, the practice of letting go a little to that which we cling to, while simultaneously meeting the most important bodily needs of others. And so personally, I find it really inspiring. We live in this excessively capitalistic society, and here's this practice of offering kind of outside of a contract, outside of the economic exchange. Martin and Willa and our teachers, they share their teachings out of a spirit of generosity. And at BCBS, we put these programs on, offering freely. And in the world that we live in, Willa and Martin do need to feed themselves, and we need to pay our bills to keep the internet going and our staff. And so I welcome you to make a offering if you have the capacity for it, as Martin says, not too much if you're feeling economically strained. It is a practice of generosity to take up the teachings that Martin and Willa have been sharing. So you will receive a link from us at BCBS with an opportunity to make an offering to, in the Zoom right now in the chat. And you can make an offering to the teachers and to BCBS. And I just want to make sure that, yes, so Willa, the course, I'm just going to share Willa's course, which is being offered by
I just did it, William.
Wonderwell. Oh, you just did?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. And Martin, maybe you could say a few words, and then we'll go to Willa for a final meditation.
Sure. So firstly, just to follow up with William's comment about dana, and in line with the theme of the day, sometimes we easily get tight around money, and maybe there's the wish to make an offering, and we think, oh, how much, etc., etc., and you'll come to whatever decision you do. But in the moment of offering, I think it's very important. Dana isn't just giving a donation; it's the practice of cultivating a generous heart. Buddha talks about it as a foundation for happiness. So please, in the moment where you click on the button and you make an offering, even it might be a very modest offering or whatever, please to connect to the felt sense of goodness. Right? It's beautiful that you're contributing to that which you value. And so for me, dana has to be an embodied practice. And rather than just thinking of a number and sending it, connect to the fact that you're supporting us personally. You're supporting Dharma teachings. You're supporting your own love of this practice. Very, very helpful, very important to make it real in that felt way. And just to follow on from that, the whole time, I'm aware that it's the end of year holiday time, and there's the atmosphere of celebration and etc., etc. And yet it's also often a difficult time of year. It can be difficult to be isolated and particularly if that might be through one's personal circumstance. It might be through being estranged from family or not having family. It might be from being involuntarily isolated through COVID. And so that encouragement to tend to care for, to sense into, just to use the resources if they're helpful today in going through the holiday season. It can also be that there can be the challenges in not being isolated, but being actually up close to and with family and the various kind of historical dynamics that get stirred up. So on the one hand, I want to wish you the joys and blessings of the season and to wish you well through the end of the year. And on the other hand, I wanted just to wish you the kind of that sense of letting your practice take care of you, or actively letting the goodness of your practice sort of fill out through particularly through this time of year. And so just to add that into the wishing you well and appreciating everyone for showing up here, and thanking BCBS and Willa for inviting me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. So delightful to be in conversation with you. And thank you, William, for being such a graceful host for us, and Julia for being behind the scenes. So we're going to conclude here with just a short sit and we started with the body and just returning to the body. And just taking some time to come home right now to the panorama of your felt experience. Taking a deep inhale and exhale into openness. Feeling body open, ears open, senses open, mind open. Heart falling open like a blooming lotus. In the spirit of openness, letting go of holding on to anything whatsoever, even the merit of our practice. Giving rise to an aspiration to pay it forward for the benefit of all. May your body be wakeful.